Joining me now, Republican Congressman Don Bacon from Nebraska. Congressman, thank you so much for talking to us. So what exactly do you think is it going to take here? How is there going to be an exit ramp to end this partial shutdown?
I think the Republicans have two choices. We could play hardball because this really is another Schumer-Jeffrey shutdown. Now they're doing this out of anger at ICE and Border Patrol, but they're already funded. So who's paying for this? It's the Coast Guard, FEMA, TSA, the Secret Service, folks like that are paying for it. And like I say, Border Patrol and ICE is already funded. So that's one option. I think the better option, though, is being American first. Let's see if we can find some low-hanging fruit that both the Democrats and Republicans can support. I think one obvious one is mandatory body cameras. I think that's an easy one. We may be able to find a couple more like that. And if we can find some areas that we agree on, then maybe we can put this behind us. But we should end it as fast as we can. It's not fair to the hundreds of thousands of employees and Coast Guard folks who are not being paid.
Democrats are doing this, though, because they say that there has to be some kind of effort to restrict ICE, their tactics based on those killings that we've seen, the killings of Americans, of Alex Preddy, of Renee Good. Would you be willing to say yes to something like having to have judicial warrants before ICE can enter a home, or any kind of limitations on where they're able to conduct arrests, like in front of hospitals or around schools and churches?
A little more critical of what the Democrats are asking for. I think the body cameras are easy. I do support warrants. What's in the Constitution, if it's, it has to be done for everybody, if you ask me. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I do know people get arrested in their homes when they're wanted, if they've committed a crime. And so I'll let the lawyers sort through that. But the Democrats are doing this because they're angry at the ICE and the Border Patrol actions. But my point would be, they're already funded. So they're punishing TSA, Coast Guard, FEMA, Secret Service, folks like that. And I personally don't think that's right. And the real correction here is every 2 years we do elections. And, ultimately the voters get to pick on this and do course corrections. I would also say, I believe the president saw the pushback of what was going on in Minneapolis. He took the feedback and he put Director Holman in charge of those operations. You can already tell that he's turned down the volume, turned down the heat. He's reduced the presence of ICE in Minneapolis. And so I already think there's a course correction going on here. And it's because, the president and the leadership team saw the polling and saw the pushback.
Some of your colleagues, though, including your Republican colleagues, think that DHS Secretary Kristi Noem should step aside, should resign in response to what's happened. Do you think that she should step aside?
I'm hesitant to tell the president what to do in this case. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I guess I'll just say I'm undecided on that point. I do think that she was playing too much for the cameras, and instead of trying to do what I think is good policy. And so I think she does deserve feedback. And in some of the things that we saw this past week, I know this wasn't Secretary Noem, but we saw with the Attorney General. If we could just raise the bar of civility a little bit, I do think Americans are rightfully divided on this whole topic. I mean, even our own party, the Republican Party, isn't sold to should we deport all folks who came here illegally, or should we focus on those who have a criminal record like gang members? There's many Republicans, and I know many Democrats, who worry about deporting folks who've been here 5 years, came here illegally perhaps, but are working, taking care of a family, and they'd like to find maybe a middle path here. I don't really blame the Secretary for that. Ultimately, Congress has to debate this and come up with a better policy.
Speaking of Congress and the very thin majority, as you well know, that Republicans have in the House, your Republican colleague Thomas Massie has been frustrated with Speaker Johnson's handling of that majority, with what he calls, quote, rubber stamp fatigue for President Trump. And he says that it's kicking in, and that whether people are retiring like yourself or people are looking to get past a difficult primary, they're going to start speaking out more. Do you think that rubber stamp fatigue has set in?
A little bit, but let me, I know Mike Johnson very well. We came in together. I think he is a very good person. He's trying his best. He's an honorable guy. He also has a 2-seat majority, and without the president's support, we would probably have a speaker's crisis, and it would probably wouldn't solve itself for a month. And so I think that we're very much on the edge of keeping a speaker versus having turmoil there, and that makes it very hard for the speaker to govern correctly. Now, that said, I think the president would be better off if we were more independent. If he allowed Congress to push back on tariffs, I think his numbers would be higher right now. If you listen to the majority's concern on Ukraine, his numbers would be higher. And if his numbers are higher, I think it helps out Republicans in the midterm elections. Right now, I think tariffs are down in favorability by 2-1. And I'm an old school conservative. I have never supported tariffs. The last Republican president to support tariffs was Herbert Hoover, and it did not work out well for Hoover during the Depression. And Republicans have always stood for peace through strength, stood up to the bully like Russia, and it has had a large voice for freedom and alliances. The president has not been that good on this area, and his numbers show it. So I think if frankly, the speaker, I know he's been trying to protect the president, but if he allowed more freedom and more independence within the Republicans in the House, and the House in general, Republicans and Democrats, I think we'd be in a better spot in many areas. And I think the president's numbers would actually be higher, and so would the Republicans right now.
It sounds like, the Congressman, that you're asking respectfully the president to change some of his very signature policies, including on tariffs, which is something that he really wants, that he ran on, that he said that he was going to do. And I know you voted to restrict his ability to enact tariffs on Canadian goods. And you also recently became the first member of your party to support an effort to limit his presidential pardon power. So do you think that more Republicans are going to be trying to restrict or limit or push back on the president? And why exactly did you think that was needed on the pardon power?
I can't speak for the other Republicans. I don't want to, it's just hard to say. I'm sure there's many who feel the way I do, but there's a risk tolerance thing that they gotta field. I have spoken my mind. I've been 5 terms. I think you could say the last 4 terms I've been very independent, conservative, and that's why the president campaigned against me in 2022 in Nebraska. So this isn't about me just retiring. But here's the key point that I'd like to communicate. I think President Trump won in November 2024 because of the border and because of inflation, not because of tariffs. Most people didn't think he would go to the extreme that he has gone on when it comes to tariffs. I think it has hurt him. Now, the numbers that we saw last week from the Tax Foundation and from CBO are very telling. The average family has paid $1,000 in tariffs, and this year it's going to be $1,300. And the CBO said 95% of all the tariffs are being paid for by the consumers. That's why in Omaha, and I can't speak for the rest of the country, but I think tariffs are unpopular at about a 2-to-1 ratio. And this is not good politics. I don't think it's good policy. And so I am trying to push the president to reconsider, or at least rein in tariffs. So I think a lot of Republicans would support tariffs one-on-one, individual countries where they were treating us unfairly. But when you start saying 80 countries at 20% tariff, they have problems. And when you say we're going to tariff the EU because they didn't support the president's statements on Greenland, we have a problem with that. And, this last week, he threatened Switzerland because he didn't like the tone of the leader of Switzerland. Folks like me don't like that kind of, I would say, vengeance-type tariff policy making. We would support individual tariffs on countries that are treating us unfairly. But I think the president has stepped way beyond what is good policy and good politics.
Well, I know that we'll be watching closely to see if Congress, if you, your colleagues, continue to try to push or provide a check, especially on tariffs, as you talk about a key issue for yourself. Congressman Don Bacon, thank you for your time.
Thank you.